Professor Vex adjusted his 4 eye stalks as he reviewed the class roster for advanced xenobiology at the Galactic Federation Academy. The first day of a new term always brought a mixture of anticipation and dread, but this particular semester promised something unprecedented. The Academy's very first human student. "By the 7 moons," Vex muttered, his scales shifting to a nervous purple hue. "I hope the environmental protocols hold." The classroom was specially designed to accommodate species from across the galaxy. Temperature zones, atmospheric bubbles, and gravity wells allowed students from gas giants to study alongside those from aquatic worlds. But Earth, classified as Death World 7, presented unique challenges. When the door slid open and the human entered, several students instinctively retreated to their safety zones. Jake Miller stood just under 2 meters tall, with brown hair, and a friendly smile that revealed disturbingly sharp omnivore teeth. Most alarming was his exposed skin. Only a thin layer of cloth separated his fragile exterior from the environment. "Hello," Jake said, waving casually. "Hope I'm not late." "Professor," Vex composed himself. "Welcome, human Miller. Please select any blue-marked seat." A Florian student named Bloom shuddered, her petals closing protectively as Jake passed. The Malorian twins, Rux and Tox, extended their sensory appendages in fascination. "Is it true," whispered Tox loudly, "that humans regularly ingest toxins for pleasure?" Jake laughed. "If you mean coffee, then absolutely. Couldn't survive without it." The class gasped collectively at the casual mention of survival dependency on poison. "DOI." Blue-skinned Aquarian Drip leaned forward. "I've studied Earth biology. They need water regularly but can survive in extreme temperatures that would boil most species." "That's not even the most interesting part," added Professor Vex, activating the holographic display. "Human Miller comes from a world with crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, toxic atmospheric components, and constant microbial warfare." The display showed Earth's statistics, and several students' translator modules struggled to convert the deadly numbers into comprehensible warnings. "For today's lesson," Vex continued, "Human Miller has volunteered to discuss adaptation mechanisms for high-stress environments." Jake stood awkwardly. "Well, I wouldn't call Earth high stress, it's actually quite nice." A horrified silence fell across the classroom. "Nice?" croaked Bloom, her voice barely audible. "Your oceans are corrosive, acid that covers most of your planet." "That's just salt water," Jake shrugged. "Great for swimming." Professor Vex's color shifted to an intrigued blue. "Perhaps you could explain how humans adapted to constantly being attacked by microscopic organisms?" "Our immune system handles most of it," Jake replied casually. "We're basically walking battlefields of competing microbes." The Malorian twins synchronized their gasps, their crystalline bodies vibrating in alarm. By the end of the class, students were both terrified and fascinated. As they filed out, Jake overheard Drip telling another student, "Did you know they sleep for 8 hours, just lying unconscious, completely vulnerable to predators?" Professor Vex approached Jake after the others had left. "That was illuminating, human Miller. I believe you've given the class quite a lot to process." Jake nodded, unaware that his casual existence had just rewritten several xenobiology textbooks, and that his next class, physical education, would cause even greater upheaval in the Academy's understanding of what constituted a Death World species. The Academy's gymnasium was designed with adaptive training zones for every conceivable physiology in the Federation. Instructor Grip, a 4-armed gravitonian with dense musculature, observed with professional interest as Jake entered the facility. "Human Miller," Grip's voice rumbled through translators. "Welcome to Advanced Physical Adaptation. I've adjusted a training station to Earth normal specifications." Jake smiled politely. "Thanks, but I can use the standard equipment." Grip's expression shifted to concern. "I must advise against that. Standard equipment is calibrated for median Federation physiology." The other students watched with curious expressions. Most were from worlds with gravity ranging from 0.3 to 0.8 Earth normal. Among them, Pebble, a silicon-based Rockarian, was considered exceptionally strong, capable of lifting 3 times his body weight. "I'll be careful." Jake promised. Instructor. Grip reluctantly agreed, assigning the class to basic strength assessments. Jake approached a lifting station beside Pebble, who was impressively hoisting a weight that flashed 180 units on its digital counter. Exceptional work, Student Pebble, Grip noted. A new personal record? Pebble's crystalline surface glowed with pride. Yes, instructor. I've been practicing. Jake politely waited his turn, then stepped up to the same machine. The class fell silent as he casually adjusted the settings and began lifting. The counter rapidly climbed 200, 250, 300 units. Human Miller, Grip interrupted with alarm. Please stop immediately. The equipment isn't rated beyond 350 units. Jake lowered the weights. Sorry about that. Should I move to something else? The gymnasium had fallen completely silent. Pebble's crystalline body had paled to an astonished white. Perhaps, Grip suggested carefully, a demonstration of Earth normal endurance? What followed shocked the class even further. Jake ran on a treadmill for 30 minutes without stopping. He performed jumping exercises that sent him soaring in the academy's lighter gravity. Most disturbing to the observing students, he continued to exhale water vapor and emit heat throughout the exercise. They're leaking, whispered Mist, a gaseous entity contained in a mobility suit. Is it dying? It's called sweating, explained Spark, an energy being with a particular interest in biology. Humans use evaporative cooling. They're temperature regulators unlike anything in the Federation. By the session's end, Jake had unintentionally demonstrated capabilities that the other students found both impressive and horrifying. His endurance alone suggested an evolutionary history of persistence hunting that made several herbivorous species profoundly uncomfortable. As they were leaving, Pebble approached Jake hesitantly. Human Miller. Jake, may I ask you something? Sure, Jake replied. Is it true that humans deliberately break down their muscles to make them stronger? Jake laughed. Yeah, we call it working out. The muscle fibers repair and get bigger. Pebble's surface rippled with shocked fascination. Your species intentionally damages itself to become stronger? I guess we do, Jake admitted. Never really thought about it that way. As Jake headed to his next class, Instructor Grip updated the Academy's database on human physical capabilities, adding a new classification: Extreme Evolutionary Pressure Species. The designation would later be referenced in 100 research papers across the Federation. Professor Mix's chemistry lab was arguably the most dangerous room at the Academy. Reinforced walls, emergency containment fields, and evacuation protocols existed for good reason. Species from across the galaxy often had violently incompatible biochemistries. Today, announced Professor Mix, her gelatinous body rippling with academic excitement, we will examine adaptation to toxic environments through controlled exposure experiments. The laboratory tables were equipped with isolation fields. Students from methane worlds couldn't risk exposure to oxygen breathers, while fluorine-based life forms maintained strict separation from hydrocarbon species. Jake sat beside Fizz, a bubbly amphibious student whose translucent skin revealed a complex circulatory system. The assignment: analyze substances harmless to one species but lethal to others. Human Miller, called Professor Mix. What substance did you bring for demonstration? Jake pulled a small container from his bag. Hot sauce. It's completely safe for humans. Professor Mix's analysis tentacles extended toward the sample, hovering over it cautiously. Her instruments registered alarming readings. This contains capsaicin, she announced, her translucent body darkening with concern. A neurotoxin that binds to pain receptors, the class murmured in shock as their translators processed this information. But it's not dangerous, Jake explained. We put it on food for flavor. Flavor? Asked Fizz, the concept clearly bewildering. You consume pain for sensory pleasure? Professor Mix conducted further analysis. It appears Human Miller is correct. Humans have evolved to interpret certain toxins as taste sensations rather than threats. Jake shrugged. We have competitions to see who can eat the spiciest foods. the revelation that humans intentionally consumed increasingly potent neurotoxins for entertainment caused such concern that Professor Mix had to call for a brief recess. During the break, Jake opened his lunch container, releasing aromas that triggered emergency sensors in 3 different atmospheric zones. When class resumed, Professor Mix had regained her composure. Let's continue with a different experiment. Each species will test their tolerance to dilute solutions of... She stopped mid-sentence as Jake casually sipped from his container. Human Miller, she asked with professional restraint. What are you consuming? Just coffee, Jake replied. Need a little caffeine to get through afternoon classes. The word caffeine triggered another round of sensor alarms. 3 students required calming pheromones when they learned that humans regularly consumed a powerful insecticide as a productivity stimulant. By the end of the class, Jake's normal human biochemistry had been reclassified 6 times in the Federation database, finally settling on paradoxical toxin utilizer. Professor Mix requested additional research funding that same day. As Jake gathered his belongings, Fizz approached cautiously. Is it true, the amphibian asked, that humans sometimes consume ethanol to alter their neural functions deliberately? Jake smiled. We call it having a drink with friends. It's fun. The concept of recreational neurotoxin consumption for social bonding was so alien that Fizz's translator failed to find a suitable conceptual match, producing only an error message. Jake didn't notice as he headed to his history class, unaware that he was rapidly becoming the most studied organism at the academy. The Galactic History Auditorium hummed with anticipation. Since Jake's arrival, attendance had doubled as students from all departments sought first-hand observation of the human phenomenon. Professor Chronicle, a time-sensitive temporalian whose body existed partially in multiple dimensions, materialized at precisely the scheduled moment. Today, she announced, her voice echoing slightly as it traversed timelines, we examine evolutionary pressure factors on civilizational development. Holographic displays illuminated showing various homeworlds. The class had previously studied standard development patterns, the underwater diplomacy evolution of the Marians, the hive mind consensus governance of the collectivists, and the environmental symbiosis of the Florians. Human Miller, Professor Chronicle called, would you provide insight into Earth's developmental pressures? Jake stood somewhat reluctantly. Public speaking wasn't his forte, but he'd grown accustomed to being the class specimen. Well, he began, Earth has pretty much everything trying to kill you. Predators, weather, geography, other humans. Other humans? Interrupted Glow, a bioluminescent student from a world with perfect species cooperation. Your own kind was a survival threat? Jake nodded. For most of our history, competing for resources was our biggest challenge. Professor Chronicle's temporal aura flickered with interest. Please elaborate on human conflict resolution mechanisms. We fought wars, Jake said simply. Thousands of them, each one driving technological development. A horrified silence fell across the auditorium. You developed technology for conflict? Asked Orbit, a hive-connected student. Not for ecological balance or spiritual enlightenment? Some of our biggest technological leaps came from trying to defeat other humans, Jake confirmed. Space travel, medicine, even the internet, all had military origins. Professor Chronicle displayed the timeline of Earth's technological development. What other species had achieved over 50,000 years, humans had compressed into a few centuries. This acceleration defies standard evolutionary models, she noted. Human Miller, how do you explain this? Jake considered. I guess when survival isn't guaranteed, innovation becomes necessary. The class discussion turned to human history's unique pattern of crisis innovation adaptation. While most Federation species had evolved toward stability, humans seemed to thrive on disruption. It appears, Professor Chronicle concluded, that Earth's death world status created not just physical adaptations, but neurological and sociological ones. Humans evolved to solve problems rather than avoid them. As the class ended, Jake found himself surrounded by curious students. Glow's gentle illumination pulsed with excitement. Is it true, she asked, that humans once believed they were alone in the universe? Many still do, Jake admitted. First contact is still just a theory for most people back home. This revelation that humans had developed spacefaring technology while believing themselves isolated in the cosmos added a new dimension to the Federation's understanding of Deathworld psychology. Jake left the auditorium unaware that his casual comments had launched an entirely new field of study, terrestrial exceptionalism. The social integration seminar was typically an opportunity for students to share cultural practices in a controlled environment. Today's session had been moved to the Academy's largest hall to accommodate interested observers from across campus. Moderator. Link, a telepathic connector whose neural pathways could bridge different species' thought patterns, welcomed everyone. Cultural exchange promotes understanding, Link began, neural tendrils glowing softly. Today, each representative will share an important cultural ritual. The presentations began with harmony, a musical resonant whose culture communicated entirely through harmonic vibrations. Their demonstration of greeting songs was met with appreciative hums from the audience. Next came Cycle, a metamorphic being who demonstrated the beautiful chrysalis ritual that marked adulthood in their society. Several presentations later, it was Jake's turn. Human Miller, Link announced. Please share a significant Earth cultural practice. Jake had prepared carefully, aware of the scrutiny. I thought I'd demonstrate how humans build social bonds through something we call sports. He displayed a hologram of various Earth athletics. These are competitive physical activities we do for recreation. The audience watched with fascination as images showed humans deliberately colliding in various game contexts, throwing themselves into physical exhaustion and celebrating victories with intense emotional displays. You risk injury voluntarily? Asked Crystal, a fragile silicon-based student. For entertainment? It's about teamwork and pushing limits, Jake explained. The physical challenge is part of the appeal. Link's neural tendrils pulsed with analytical intensity. Our database suggests these activities simulate hunting and warfare behaviors from your evolutionary past. I never thought of it that way, Jake admitted. But I guess football does have strategy like battle, and basketball has that hunter's precision. The discussion evolved to human art forms, where Jake's explanation of horror entertainment generated particular confusion. Let me understand correctly, said Shadow, a darkness-dwelling empathic student. Humans create scenarios depicting their own destruction for pleasure? We call it recreational fear, Jake explained. It's like practice for handling real danger. This concept, simulating crisis for entertainment, was so uniquely human that Link had to create a new neural pathway just to process it. The seminar concluded with a comparative analysis of social bonding mechanisms. While most Federation species developed trust through predictability and harmony, humans seemed to forge their strongest connections through shared challenge and stress response. It appears, Link summarized, that humans have adapted to perpetual crisis by incorporating stress into their social development. What would traumatize other species serves as bonding for Earth natives. As students dispersed, Jake found himself approached by Harmony, the musical resonant. Human Miller, they hummed softly. Would you teach me this high-five gesture I observed in your sports presentation? It seems an efficient method of connection. Jake smiled and raised his hand. Just slap your appendage against mine. It's how we celebrate success. The simple physical contact, casual for humans but intimate for most species, caused Harmony's resonance field to glow with new frequencies. Word of the high-five ritual spread quickly through the Academy, becoming the first of many human customs that would gradually transform Federation social protocols. The medical sciences amphitheater fell silent as Dr. Heel activated the holographic display of human internal anatomy. As the Academy's foremost xenobiologist, she had requested this special session to address growing faculty concerns about Jake's presence. Distinguished colleagues, she began, her regenerative cells glowing with professional interest. I've called this symposium to discuss our Terran student. The audience comprised mostly medical faculty and advanced students, though representatives from every department attended. Jake sat somewhat uncomfortably in the front row. Human Miller has consented to discuss his species' medical particularities, Dr. Heal explained. Most notably, their extraordinary repair mechanisms. The hologram zoomed in on human cellular structures. Dr. Heal gestured toward Jake. Please describe what happens when you experience physical damage. Jake shrugged. We call it healing. Cut yourself, it scabs over, then becomes new skin. Without medical intervention? Asked a shocked faculty member. For minor stuff, yeah. Broken bones knit back together. Infections get fought off. Dr. Heal continued. Human immune response involves intentional fever, raising body temperature, to levels that would kill most Federation species. The hologram demonstrated the process of inflammation, white blood cell response, and tissue regeneration. The audience watched in fascinated horror as the simulation showed bone knitting together after fracture. Most remarkable, Dr. Heal noted, is their neural plasticity. Human Miller, please explain what happens when your brain suffers injury. Other parts take over the function, Jake said. The brain rewires itself. This concept, autonomous rewiring of central neural pathways, was so revolutionary that 3 neurological sciences professors immediately left to revise their research proposals. Furthermore, Dr. Heal continued, humans routinely survive radiation exposure that would be fatal to 90% of Federation species. A murmur ran through the audience. One faculty member stood, their photosynthetic fronds quivering, with concern. Are we certain hosting this student meets safety protocols? These repair mechanisms suggest parasitic or viral evolutionary influence. Jake laughed, then apologized for the outburst. Sorry, but we're not infected. That's just how humans work. We evolved on a high-radiation planet with lots of predators and diseases. Dr. Heal displayed Earth's radiation levels, pathogen diversity, and predator statistics. The data painted a picture of a planetary crucible that had forced human evolution into unprecedented adaptability. The Federation has classified 97 planets as Death World, she explained, but only Earth combines high gravity, radiation, atmospheric toxins, predator diversity, and microbial warfare in a single environment. By the session's end, the medical faculty had moved from concern to intense scientific interest. When Jake mentioned casually that humans could donate organs and blood to each other, Dr. Heal had to call for a recess, as the concept of compatible interchangeable parts within a species was too profound for immediate processing. As the symposium concluded, Jake found himself surrounded by medical students requesting internships on Earth. Dr. Heal pulled him aside. Human Miller, she said quietly, I believe your species represents an evolutionary path the Federation has never encountered. Would you consent to additional studies? Jake nodded, not fully grasping that he had just become the catalyst for the most significant paradigm shift in Federation medical science in 3 centuries. The grand auditorium of the Galactic Federation Academy gleamed under ceremonial lights. Graduation day had arrived, marking the completion of the most unusual academic year in the institution's 10,000-year history. Dean Wisdom, whose 9-lobed brain had earned distinction across 17 galaxies, addressed the assembled graduates and faculty. This year has challenged our most fundamental understanding of adaptability, the dean began. No event in our history better exemplifies this than the admission of our first Terran student. All eyes and sensory appendages turned toward Jake, who sat among his classmates, his simple bipedal form now a familiar sight across campus. Human Miller's presence has resulted in 14 new research departments, 37 revised textbooks, and a complete reconsideration of our classification system for habitable worlds. The dean continued. When Human Miller arrived, we classified Earth as Death World 7, hostile, dangerous, and barely suitable for complex life. Today we recognize it as something else entirely, an evolutionary accelerator world. Holographic. Displays showed the revised classification system. Earth now occupied a unique category, a planet whose extreme conditions had produced not merely survivors, but innovators. Jake's academic advisor, Professor Vex, had undergone a dramatic perspective shift since that first day in xenobiology class. His scales now remained a permanent shade of respectful blue whenever discussing human resilience. To honor this new understanding, Dean Wisdom announced, we have created the Terran Resilience Scholarship for species from challenging worlds. As graduates were called to receive their credentials, Jake reflected on his year at the Academy. He had arrived feeling like an oddity, the fragile human among advanced species. Now he understood that what he had always taken for granted, human adaptability, resilience, and persistence, represented something extraordinary in the galaxy. When Jake's name was called, the audience erupted in a mixture of sounds, some applauding in the human tradition they had learned, others expressing appreciation through their native communications. Dean Wisdom presented Jake with not only his xenobiology certification, but also an unprecedented honor, the title of Living Educational Resource. Human Miller has consented to remain at the Academy as our first Terran faculty member. The Dean announced to widespread excitement. His course on Death World adaptation strategies will begin next term. As the ceremony concluded, Jake found himself surrounded by classmates who had once feared his alien biology. Bloom, whose petals had closed in fright on his first day, now extended a friendly frond. The Malorian twins, Rux and Tox, presented him with a crystal containing their shared memories of the year. Most moving was the approach of Pebble, the strong Rockarian who had been so shocked in physical training. Human Miller, Jake. Pebble's crystalline surface shimmered with emotion. Your people have a saying I've studied. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I never understood, until meeting you. Jake smiled, touched by the gesture. That's exactly right. Professor Chronicle, who had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall through her temporal perception, offered a final observation at the reception. In all my study of galactic development, she told Jake quietly, I've observed that species either adapt to their environment or change their environment to suit them. Humans alone have done both simultaneously, and with remarkable speed. As Jake looked around at the diverse life forms that had become his friends and colleagues, he realized the true lesson of his year at the Academy. Humans weren't exceptional because they had evolved on a death world. They were exceptional because they had never accepted those limitations. The next class of Federation students would arrive soon, including 3 more humans. The galaxy was about to discover that Jake Miller wasn't an anomaly. He was just the first representative of a species that had turned survival into an art form. And somewhere in the vast database of the Galactic Federation, Earth's classification continued to evolve, from Death World to Evolutionary Accelerator to its final designation, Cradle of Resilience. The end.